We all know that Saladin is remembered as a mighty sultan and a legendary leader of the Crusades. But what was life really like for him? Imagine waking before dawn, the cool river mist clinging to your skin, your home echoing with prayers and stories, while your father's quiet strength and your uncle's daring adventures shape your earliest lessons. In today's video, we'll explore what your life as Saladin in the Crusades would actually be like. So, let's not waste any time and let's begin. The quiet of dawn settles around you, drifting like a final blessing across the open sands. As the first threads of sunlight touch the world, they guide your thoughts backward, away from the duties waiting on the horizon and into the earliest memories that shaped the man you will become. Before sultanship, before armies and treaties, there was simply a boy born along the Tigris River in a rugged frontier town called Tikrit. Tikrit in your childhood is not a place of grandeur or luxury. It is a hard land carved from stone and wind, where homes cling to the earth with the stubborn devotion of the Kurdish families who built them. The mornings smell of river clay and wood smoke. The nights echo with the distant calls of desert birds settling into sleep. Your family home is modest, its walls thick with packed earth, cool in the summer heat and warm against winter winds. Rugs woven in familiar Kurdish patterns cover the floors, their colors faded, but their meanings deeply rooted in generations of ancestry. Your father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, is a stern yet gentle man, respected for his loyalty and unshakable integrity. He moves through the house with deliberate calm, his voice steady, his eyes watchful. Even as a child, you feel the quiet weight of his presence, like a pillar holding the household upright. Your uncle, Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, is his opposite. Louder, bigger, wrapped in the scent of leather and steel, always returning from some journey with dust in his beard and stories crackling in his voice. Between them, you learn two truths that will define you: the strength of discipline and the necessity of courage. Your mother keeps the household woven together with a grace so effortless it seems almost invisible. She rises before the sun, stirs pots with herbs and lentils, hums verses from the Quran while kneading dough. The gentle warmth of her presence forms the first rhythm of your life. From her, you learn tenderness, a quality that the world around you rarely rewards, but your heart quietly absorbs. In the small courtyard outside your home, you spend your early years chasing shadows, studying the way dust swirls in the wind, and watching your father speak to travelers who pass through Tikrit on their way to larger cities. Caravan leaders, wandering scholars, tired soldiers, each brings news from distant lands, and each leaves an imprint on your imagination. You listen, wide-eyed, as they speak of bustling Aleppo, scholarly Baghdad, and the glittering courts of Cairo. Even then, you notice how your father listens more than he speaks, how he weighs each word, each gesture. You see that leadership begins not with ordering others, but with understanding them. It is a lesson that settles in you quietly, like a seed in fertile soil. Tikrit's rough landscape teaches you endurance. The steep cliffs overlooking the river challenge your young legs. The harsh winters strengthen your resolve, and the tight-knit community of Kurdish families surrounds you with shared traditions, hospitality, devotion, and honor. You grow up hearing the lilting cadence of Kurdish poetry, recited by elders whose voices tremble with memory. You see neighbors share their last loaf of bread with travelers. You learn that kindness is not weakness, and mercy is not surrender. Though your childhood is simple, the world around you is shifting. Rumors drift in with the travelers, rumblings of political instability, whispers of rising powers and falling alliances. You are too young to understand the full weight of these forces, yet you sense your father's increasing unease. Conversations with your uncle become more frequent, spoken behind closed doors or in low tones under the stars. And then, one night, under a crescent moon that glows like a silver blade, an incident changes everything. A powerful official in Tikrit, angered by your father's unyielding honesty, turns against him. The air grows thick with tension, and your home, once filled with the comfort of routine, becomes a place of hurried whispers and silent prayers. Your family gathers your belongings in the dim glow of lantern light. Rugs rolled tightly, small chests clasped shut, bread wrapped for the journey. You feel the tremor of uncertainty, but also the steady reassurance of your father's hand on your shoulder. Tikrit fades behind you as dawn breaks, the river glowing softly in the early light. You leave not in defeat, but in quiet dignity, stepping into a wider world that will shape your destiny. Ahead lies Mosul, larger, livelier, and filled with forces that will introduce you to politics, military life, and the first steps toward becoming the leader history will remember. Mosul rises before you as a world entirely different from Tikrit, a city where the Tigris widens, where the call to prayer echoes through stone alleys, where scholars, merchants, and soldiers weave through the streets in an endless rhythm. As your family approaches its gates, the dust of travel still clinging to your clothes, you feel a quiet stirring in your chest. Tikrit was the beginning of your story. Mosul is where your mind begins to awaken. The city greets you with scents you have never known. Saffron drifting from market stalls, the warm sweetness of roasted nuts, the sharp, refreshing smell of parchment ink brushed by scribes. Men in long robes walk with purpose, carrying scrolls, tools, spices, or weapons. You see horsemen moving through the crowd with trained discipline, their armor glinting in the sun. It is a place of motion, ideas, ambition, and beneath it all, a steady hum of opportunity. Your father quickly finds work under the Zengid rulers, who value his honesty and experience. Stability, for a time, returns to your household. But for you, Mosul's greatest gift is its wealth of knowledge. You are introduced to teachers who carry decades of learning in their quiet gazes. They lead you to the madrasa, where the air is heavy with ink and devotion, where students sit cross-legged on woven mats, reciting Quranic verses with voices soft and even. You learn Arabic more deeply here, not just as a spoken tongue, but as a language of poetry, law, and wisdom. Your teachers explain fine distinctions in grammar, subtle metaphors in classical literature, and the layered meanings of the Quran. Your mind stretches in ways your younger self could never have imagined in Tikrit. Outside the madrasa, life continues to shape you. Your father insists that strength of character must match strength of intellect. He guides you through the crowded markets, teaching you to observe quietly, to notice the way people negotiate, the weight a merchant's eyes carry when speaking truth instead of flattery, the unspoken tensions that ripple between warriors sworn to different lords. Through him, you begin to see the city not just as a collection of buildings, but as a living organism held together by trust, fear, loyalty, and power. Your Uncle Shirko visits often, bringing with him a different kind of education. He introduces you to the training grounds outside the city walls, where soldiers practice their forms from dawn until dusk. The clang of metal, the rhythmic thud of hooves, the sharp scent of sweat and leather, all of it contrasts sharply with the tranquility of the madrasa. Shirku watches your progress with a mixture of pride and amusement. You are not yet a warrior, nor do you show a natural hunger for battle, but he sees in you a quiet determination, a patience that he knows is rarer than brute strength. You try your hand at archery, the bowstring biting gently into your fingertips. You practice horseback riding, learning to move with the animal rather than against it. You listen as Shirku explains strategy, not with the fiery bravado of a soldier, but with the thoughtful precision of a commander who understands the weight of every decision. In these moments, you realize that leadership is not a path chosen in a single instant, but one shaped by countless subtle influences. As weeks turn into months, Mosul becomes a place of balance for you, a bridge between the innocence of childhood and the responsibilities waiting beyond it. You feel yourself changing, your thoughts deepening, your awareness widening. The world is no longer distant or abstract. You begin to sense the political currents swirling around the Zengid court, the early tensions between regional powers, the rising murmurs of crusader movements far to the west. Though you still sleep each night on a simple mat beside your brothers, the boy who once chased shadows into Crete is slowly growing into someone who understands that the future is built through discipline, observation, and humility. Then one day, your father receives word. The family is to move again, this time to the great ancient city of Damascus. It is a place of scholars, poets, warriors, and rulers. A place where your understanding of the world will deepen once more. And so, with Mosul fading behind you, you turn toward Damascus and toward the next chapter of your awakening. The road to Damascus stretches long and winding before you, carrying you through valleys brushed with olive trees, past villages where shepherds guide their flocks across rolling hills, and alongside streams that glimmer like threads of silver under the sun. As you draw nearer, travelers around you lower their voices, as if instinctively showing respect for the ancient city that has stood since before memory. You hear its name spoken like a soft prayer, Damashq, the beating heart of Syria. Nothing quite prepares you for the moment Damascus reveals itself. The city rises like a garden in stone, wrapped in orchards of apricot and pomegranate, fed by the clear waters of the Barada River. Minarets catch the light of the afternoon sun, turning pale gold as the call to prayer radiates outward in perfect harmony. The air is sweeter here, tinged with the scent of jasmine vines that spill over walls and courtyards, perfuming even the narrowest alleyways. Merchants call out gently from shaded corners, their stalls draped with silk, pottery, and bundles of dyed wool in every imaginable hue. You feel, for the first time, that you have stepped into a world shaped not only by strength, but by beauty. Your father quickly enters the service of the city's rulers, and your family settles into a modest home surrounded by other Kurdish families. Though your dwelling is simple, the atmosphere of Damascus makes everything feel richer. Its libraries, its scholars, its craftspeople, and its serene places of worship. You find yourself wandering through its winding streets, entranced by the way sunlight filters through wooden lattice screens, casting patterns across the stone paths like woven tapestries of light. Your formal education deepens in Damascus. You sit among scholars who speak softly, yet carry the weight of empires in their minds. They teach you Quranic exegesis, history, statecraft, and the ethical underpinnings of leadership. You learn that true strength is rooted in wisdom, and wisdom in humility. Your teachers challenge you not to memorize alone, but to reflect on justice, on compassion, on the responsibilities that come with power. But education in Damascus extends far beyond the madrasa. You watch the city's leaders meet in shaded courtyards, discussing disputes between merchants or the needs of neighboring villages. You observe judges who weigh arguments with meticulous fairness, scribes who record treaties with quiet precision, and soldiers who guard the city gates not with arrogance, but with disciplined dedication. Everywhere you turn, you see examples of balanced leadership, strength paired with restraint, authority softened by kindness. Your uncle Shirkuh visits often, his laugh booming as he strides through your doorway, filling the home with stories of distant campaigns. His presence is a reminder of the world beyond Damascus, a world of shifting allegiances and growing tensions. You are old enough now to understand that the Crusaders who carved kingdoms along the Mediterranean coast are not merely distant threats. They are forces reshaping the political landscape around you. Yet Damascus softens the harsh edges of these realities. In the evenings, the city takes on a dreamlike calm. Lanterns glow from balconies, casting warm light onto cobbled streets. The gentle rhythm of oud music floats from courtyards where families gather. On nights when the moon is bright, you join friends on rooftop terraces, watching the stars shimmer above the silent, sprawling city. These quiet hours imprint themselves deeply in your memory, forming a sanctuary you will return to again and again in the years to come. Still, as beautiful as Damascus is, it is not untouched by conflict. Whispers circulate of rising threats, political fractures, and the increasing pressure on Muslim lands. You sense your father's growing concern, and your uncle's frequent visits only confirm that the world's balance is shifting. One afternoon, Shirkuh pulls you aside. His expression is more serious than usual, his voice low. There are opportunities rising in the south, he tells you, the words heavy with meaning. Egypt calls for strong hands and clear minds. The time will come when we must answer. You do not yet grasp the full implications, but you feel the stirrings of change. The tranquility of Damascus has shaped your heart and mind, preparing you for a future you cannot yet imagine. And soon, the path laid for you will pull you from the city of light into the demanding shadow of military life, guided by the uncle who sees a destiny in you that you have yet to see in yourself. Your days in Damascus begin to take on a quiet rhythm. Study in the mornings, helping your father with administrative matters in the midday heat, and wandering shaded streets in the late afternoon when the city softens and cools. But as the years pass, that rhythm gradually shifts. Whispers of instability in Egypt grow louder. Crusader raids flare along the coast, and your uncle Shirkuh, whose presence always seemed too large for any room, begins to appear at your door with increasing urgency. One evening, he invites you to walk with him outside the city walls. The orchards surrounding Damascus are alive with the rustling of leaves and the faint chirping of birds settling into their roosts. The air is scented with mint and earth. For a while, Shirkuh says nothing. He simply walks, his hands clasped behind his back, his heavy boots crunching softly across the packed soil. At last he speaks. Saladin, you are nearly a man now. His voice is low, steady. The world is changing faster than scholars can write about it, faster than rulers can respond. And you, he pauses, studying your face, must be ready. You know what he means before he says the words outright. In recent months, you've heard him speaking with your father about gathering troops, forming alliances, and the chaotic politics of the Fatimid court. You've heard the names of Crusader leaders spoken with concern. You've sensed the current pulling you towards something larger, heavier, unavoidable. But still, the weight of his expectation presses against something inside you. You have never hungered for war. Your heart has always leaned more towards study, reason, diplomacy, the calm guidance of wise leadership. You have watched scholars open difficult hearts with gentle words, and you have seen your father resolve disputes with fairness rather than force. You know conflict is sometimes necessary, but you have never dreamed of glory on the battlefield. Shirkuh sees this in your eyes. He does not mock you for it. Instead, he nods thoughtfully, as though he expected it. Courage, he says quietly, is not found in loving war. Courage is doing what must be done when your people need you, and our people will need you. His words stay with you as he brings you to the training grounds the next morning. There, soldiers move in precise formation, their armor catching the sun with flashes of silver and bronze. The smell of oiled leather mixes with dust and sweat. Horses snort and stamp their hooves, the ground trembling slightly beneath their weight. Shirkuh begins your training gently, not because he doubts your abilities, but because he recognizes your mind works differently from other young men. You watch everything first, learning movements before attempting them. You study the logic behind formations, the patterns in archery technique, the balance required to guide a horse with fluid ease. Your early swings of the practice blade are clumsy, your arms burning from the effort. But you improve, slowly, steadily, because you approach training as you approached study, with patience, discipline, and humility. The soldiers grow to respect your seriousness, even if you lack their natural appetite for combat. Weeks turn into months, and though your body grows stronger, your heart remains unchanged. You find no thrill in violence, no excitement in the clang of steel. What resonates with you instead is the responsibility that comes with leadership, the quiet knowledge that strength must serve justice, not ambition. Shirkuh sees your reluctance, but he does not try to force it from you. One evening, as the sun sinks behind the hills, he places a firm hand on your shoulder. "You do not need to love battle, Saladin," he murmurs. "But one day, you will command men who do. And to lead them well, you must understand the world they walk in." His words settle deep into you, like seeds waiting for the right season to grow. And then, just as your training begins to feel familiar, news arrives from the south. Egypt is unraveling faster than any had expected. Factions are rising. The Fatimid viziers are grasping for control, and Crusader forces circle like hawks. Shirkuh receives the summons he has been waiting for. He will lead an expedition to Egypt, and you will go with him. The morning you depart, Damascus arrives quietly, wrapped in the soft hush of dawn. The city that once felt impossibly vast now seems to lean protectively around you as you make your way toward the caravans assembling outside its walls. Lanterns sway gently from ropes, their dim light reflecting off bundles of supplies, coils of rope, and the polished hooves of restless horses. The Barada River murmurs behind you like a fading lullaby. This is the moment when childhood ends, when study and contemplation must give way to the dust of long travel and the uncertainty of war. Your father stands beside you with a calm expression, though his eyes are richer with emotion than words can express. He places a hand on your shoulder, a gesture that has guided you through every step of your youth, and tells you simply, "Walk with honor, my son." Your uncle Shirkuh, armored and brimming with restless energy, claps you on the back with far less subtlety. "And keep your wits about you. Egypt is no quiet courtyard." His booming laugh rolls through the morning air. You climb onto your horse and join the formation. Ahead lies a journey of hundreds of miles through shifting lands, each one pulsing with its own rhythms of life and conflict. You do not know what Egypt will demand of you, but you feel its pull all the same, distant, urgent, like the first hints of a storm approaching. As the caravan begins its slow descent into the open wilderness, Damascus recedes behind you. Its minarets shrink into silhouettes against the brightening sky, its fragrance of jasmine replaced by the dry breath of the desert. For a moment, the world is quiet enough that you can hear only the soft thud of hooves and the steady exhale of your horse. Days pass in a haze of sand and silence. The desert stretches endlessly, its colors shifting from pale gold to deep amber as the sun arcs across the sky. Wind rolls over the dunes in waves, whispering against your clothing, teasing stray strands of your hair. At night, the air cools dramatically, and the stars bloom across the heavens with a clarity you never saw in the city. Thousands of points of light flickering like lanterns hung by unseen hands. The men speak softly during these nights, huddled around small fires as they whisper about politics and alliances, about the strange tensions tearing Egypt apart. You listen, absorbing every detail. The Fatimid Caliphate, once grand and powerful, is now weakened by internal conflict. Viziers plot against one another. Crusader forces watch from afar, waiting for any sign of vulnerability. Into this fractured landscape, Shirkuh is marching, not for conquest, but to secure the region for the Zengids and restore stability. During the long days of travel, you begin to feel the physical strain of the journey. Your legs ache from riding. Your throat stings from the dryness of the air. And your arms grow sore from gripping the reins through unpredictable gusts of sand-laden wind. Yet somewhere beneath the hardship, you feel yourself changing. The steady rhythm of travel, step, breath, heartbeat, strips away all excess, revealing a quiet resilience in you that you never knew existed. Your uncle watches your progress with a mixture of pride and curiosity. One evening, as you settle beside him to share a bowl of lentils and dates, he remarks, "Warriors are not made by swords alone. They are shaped by the roads they walk." He gestures to the horizon, where the last streaks of sunlight fade into shadow. And this road will shape you more than any battlefield. As the caravan crosses the Sinai Peninsula, the terrain shifts again. Rocky paths turn into rolling dunes, and dunes into broad plains tinted with the faint scent of the sea. For the first time, you catch a whisper of the Nile's presence, its moisture carried on the wind like an ancient memory. Finally, after weeks of enduring the stark beauty and unyielding challenge of the desert, you crest a final ridge and see it, a lush ribbon of green winding through the golden expanse, dotted with palm groves and villages. Beyond it rises the sprawling city of Cairo, shimmering in the sun like a mirage turned real. Egypt is before you, vast, powerful, wounded, waiting. You descend the ridge slowly, feeling the weight of destiny settle gently across your shoulders. Ahead lies Cairo's labyrinth of intrigue, a world where your life will change more profoundly than you can yet imagine. Cairo greets you, not quietly, but with a kind of living radiance, an overwhelming sensory tapestry that seems to stretch endlessly in every direction. As your caravan moves through its massive gates, the world around you expands into sounds, colors, and scents unlike anything you've known. The Nile, broad and slow-moving, glimmers under the hot Egyptian sun, its surface reflecting boats that glide like dark silhouettes across liquid gold. Palms sway gently along its banks, and the city hums with the life of thousands. The streets are a labyrinth of activity, winding and twisting like rivers of people. Merchants shout friendly greetings over the tops of their stalls, their voices rising above the chatter of crowds. Children weave effortlessly between adults, laughing as they carry bundles of herbs or baskets of figs. Donkeys bleat as they pull carts, stacked high with goods from distant lands. And everywhere, you smell spices, cinnamon, coriander, saffron, and a dozen others you cannot yet name. Egypt is not Damascus. It is louder, brighter, heavier with expectations. Here, every conversation is layered with meaning. Every glance carries a hidden question. Every relationship seems to have strings attached, pulling in ways unseen. Your arrival with Shirkuh is not unnoticed. The Fatimid court has been torn apart by internal conspiracies, with rival viziers clashing in both politics and pride. Some see your uncle's presence as salvation. Others view it as a threat. You learn quickly that Cairo's beauty does not soften its dangers. Indeed, it hides them elegantly behind silk curtains and golden mosaics. Despite your youth, you find yourself pushed into the heart of political life. You stand beside your uncle as he meets with dignitaries in candlelit halls, the air thick with incense and unspoken strategies. Servants move silently through these gatherings, pouring mint tea into delicate cups, while their ears collect whispers, drifting like smoke from one corner to another. You watch, absorbing everything, your mind turning each gesture and phrase into a piece of an expanding puzzle. Yet amid the tension, Cairo also holds a gentle charm. During the quieter hours of dawn, when the streets are still waking, you slip away to explore its quieter corners. You walk along the Nile's banks, listening to the soft splash of oars and the distant call of waterbirds settling into flight. You find shade beneath date palms, reading passages from the Quran while warm sunlight filters through their fronds. You wander through the mosque courtyards, where the stone floors cool your feet even as the desert heat rises outside. The Fatimid architecture captivates you, the arches carved with meticulous care, the intricate geometric patterns adorning walls, the artistry that seems to honor both beauty and precision. You begin to understand why Cairo has been coveted by so many. Its wealth is not simply in gold or power, but in the depth of culture that flows through its veins. Still, the world beneath the surface grows more turbulent. Viziers exchange threats wrapped in polite phrases. Factions shift alliances overnight. Rumors ripple through the city like wind through reeds, and you can feel the ground beneath Egypt trembling under political strain. Nights once filled with gentle contemplation in Damascus now hold a different energy, one of uncertainty, urgency, and potential danger. Your uncle senses the shifting tide. You see it in his eyes, in the tightening of his jaw. Whether he intended it or not, he has stepped into a struggle where strength alone will not be enough. And though you remain by his side, it becomes clear that your own role is beginning to take shape, quietly, without fanfare, as though destiny is writing your name on parchment you have yet to see. Marshaling forces, negotiating loyalties, balancing the fragile fabric of this great city. Each day teaches you something new about the nature of leadership and the cost of responsibility. Egypt, both magnificent and wounded, is testing you. And soon, its trials will deepen, drawing you into the very heart of conflict, because Shirkuh's rising influence is awakening both allies and enemies. The sands of Egypt are shifting, and before long, you will find yourself standing at the center of their storm. Your uncle's rise in Egypt happens gradually at first, a series of small decisions, strategic alliances, and careful movements that build into something larger. But soon, the pace quickens. Political tempests sharpen around him, drawing in soldiers, courtiers, and rivals like winds spiraling toward a gathering storm. And in the middle of that storm, you stand at his side, observing, learning, absorbing every detail. Egypt's fractured leadership can no longer ignore Shirkuh's strength. Some welcome him as the stabilizing force they desperately need. Others watch him with veiled suspicion, whispering that a man of such ambition could never stop at small victories. The Fatimid Caliph, young and impressionable, becomes a figure pulled between competing influences. At times, you see him surrounded by anxious advisors, each one determined to shape him like clay. At other times, he stands alone on a balcony, staring out across Cairo with an expression that speaks of burdens far too great for his youth. Shirkuh's reputation grows in this atmosphere of tension. He commands with a presence forged through decades of battle experience. His voice fills every tent, every hall, every stone chamber he steps into. Yet to you, he remains the man who once told stories by firelight, who saw in you a potential you weren't certain you possessed. As his responsibilities expand, so do yours. You accompany him to councils where decisions of life and death are made over cups of bitter coffee and carefully chosen words. You walk the length of a camp at dusk, observing the soldiers as they sharpen blades, repair shields, and mutter prayers under their breath. You begin to understand the rhythm of military life, the constant preparation, the unspoken anticipation, the quiet moments between orders where men look inward and hope for courage. Training intensifies as well. The heat of Egypt presses against your skin as you ride across open plains, practicing maneuvers with soldiers who have spent years mastering their craft. You learn to draw your bow smoothly, to strike with precision rather than force, to guide your horse through sudden turns without losing balance. Sweat beads along your brow, and dust settles into every crease of your clothing. But you do not complain. You are learning not simply how to fight, but how to endure. Shirkuh rarely praises you openly, but you begin to catch glimpses of approval in the way he nods during training or entrusts you with small yet significant tasks. He sends you to negotiate supplies with local farmers, to relay messages to officers, to observe the strengths and weaknesses of the troops. You do these things quietly, relying on the lessons of patience and humility your father once taught you. Despite the growing weight of your duties, Egypt continues to enchant you. The Nile remains a source of calm, its waters reflecting the glow of lanterns in the evenings. You sometimes find a quiet moment along its banks, listening to frogs croak in the reeds and watching palm fronds sway in the faint night breeze. In those still pockets of time, you feel yourself suspended between two worlds, one of contemplation and one of conflict. And then, just as the political tensions seem ready to snap, everything accelerates. A faction within the Fatimid government turns violently against the current vizier. Fear spreads through Cairo like wildfire. Rumors race through the marketplaces and courtyards, some claiming the Crusaders are preparing to exploit the chaos, others insisting that a coup is imminent. Shirkuh is summoned to the palace. You accompany him through shadowed hallways illuminated by flickering oil lamps. The air inside is thick with incense and dread. Courtiers bow nervously as you pass, their eyes darting like trapped birds. The caliph stands at the far end of the chamber, his youthful face pale but determined. He chooses Shirkuh. In a single, silent moment, Your uncle becomes the dominant military force in Egypt. Power shifts like sand beneath your feet. And with it, your role shifts too. Every decision now carries greater weight. Every action reverberates across the fragile landscape of a divided nation. Yet the sands are not done moving. Because soon, faster than you expect, Shirkuh's ascent will come to an abrupt and unforeseen end, and the weight of Egypt will fall upon your shoulders. It happens more quickly than anyone expects. 1 week, Shirkuh stands at the height of his power, commanding armies, shaping alliances, securing Egypt's fragile stability. The next, he falls heavy with illness, struck down not by blade or enemy, but by the quiet inevitability of the human body. Fever takes him without warning. You sit by his side in a dimly lit chamber, listening to his breath grow shallow as servants move with hushed urgency around you. The air smells faintly of incense and warm stone, and nothing about the room feels large enough to contain the loss that approaches. Shirkuh tries to speak, but his voice is thick and strained. You lean closer. His fingers, so strong during battle, now tremble lightly as they grasp your wrist. Responsibility, he whispers, falls to the one prepared for it, not the one who seeks it. His eyes, fierce even in weakness, hold yours with unspoken meaning. Then the strength leaves his grip, and the chamber becomes impossibly quiet. The news spreads through Cairo with the speed of wind across the desert. Soldiers bow their heads. Courtiers fall silently into one another's arms. The Fatimid court, already shaken by instability, teeters on the edge of panic. For hours afterward, the palace feels like a vast shell emptied of its echo. Everyone moving slowly, almost reverently, as if one wrong step might disturb the foundation of the city itself. Yet in that stillness, a question rises. Who now will lead? The caliph, young and impressionable, cannot rely on his divided court. Rival factions sharpen their metaphorical blades, each eager to seize power before their opponents do. Eyes turn to you, not with confidence at first, but with calculation, curiosity, and a cautious sort of hope. You are Shirkuh's nephew, the son of a trusted family, a man who has shown patience, discretion, and humility. You are not the loudest voice in the room, but often the firmest. And in a city where ambition burns too easily, your reluctance becomes a kind of quiet strength. The proposal comes not as a question, but as a statement spoken in a solemn chamber, scented with sandalwood and fear. You will be the vizier. The turban placed before you is not merely cloth. It is a symbol of political authority, responsibility, and the immense burden of stabilizing a great and wounded nation. Your heart tightens at the sight of it. You did not seek this. You did not dream of it. Yet destiny, that subtle architect, has arranged the pieces in such a way that refusal is no more possible than stopping the Nile from flowing. As you accept the position, a heavy calm settles over you. The cloth feels warm in your hands, still echoing with the legacy of those who wore it before you. When it is wrapped around your head, the palace guards bow in acknowledgement. Courtiers murmur blessings. The caliph's tense shoulders relax, if only slightly. Egypt inhales again, slowly, tremblingly, as though reminding itself that it still lives. Your first days as vizier are filled with ceaseless activity. You gather advisors, review decrees, and listen to appeals from citizens who line the palace halls seeking guidance. You study the state treasury and find it thin. You review the army's condition and find it fractured. Yet beneath all these challenges, you sense something resolute within the people, an underlying desire for stability, unity, and fairness. Their eyes look to you with expectation, not fear. You feel your father's lessons echo through every decision. Weigh every word. Choose humility over haste. Seek truth over glory. You rely on judgment shaped by Damascus's scholars, on quiet resilience forged in the desert, on the steadiness you cultivated under Shirkuh's demanding gaze. At night, when the palace finally grows silent, you walk alone through its courtyards. The moon casts pale patterns across the tiled floors. The fountains whisper softly, as though reminding you that leadership, like water, must move steadily and without arrogance. You breathe deeply, the weight of the turban pressing gently against your brow, a constant reminder of the responsibility you now carry. But the stillness never lasts long. Rumors swirl that enemies, both within and beyond Egypt, begin to test your new authority. The Crusaders watch from afar. Rival Fatimid officials whisper behind curtains, and the people, though hopeful, remain uncertain of what your leadership will bring. Which means your next task is unavoidable. You must rebuild Egypt's army, carefully, patiently, with both strength and justice. Only then can you secure the land now entrusted to you. The aftermath of humiliation and exile left Abdullah's ego battered, but his resolve was not broken. If there was one lesson he had learned, it was that power was not inherited. It had to be forged, often in the crucible of defeat. The remnants of his loyal supporters, once scattered and disheartened, began to coalesce around him again. They were few in number, but fierce in conviction, a reflection of the leader they still believed in. Abdullah knew that rebuilding an army was not merely about numbers. It was about creating a force that would be disciplined, loyal, and capable of asserting his influence in a world that had increasingly sidelined him. Abdullah began by traveling to smaller tribes and villages on the periphery of Yathrib. He spoke in measured tones, weaving a narrative that balanced both nostalgia for the days before the Prophet's rise and a cautious critique of the current order. To many, his words resonated. Discontent, whether born of jealousy, fear, or simple resentment, became the fertile ground for recruitment. Young men and seasoned warriors alike, who felt overlooked or constrained, found a purpose in Abdullah's vision of a resurgence. He offered them something tangible, a role in history, a chance to reclaim status, and, perhaps most importantly, the validation of their abilities. But recruitment was only the beginning. Abdullah understood that a ragtag assembly of fighters would not be enough to confront the growing power of Muhammad and his followers. Discipline had to be instilled, trust had to be earned, and a hierarchy had to be established. He appointed lieutenants not based solely on family ties or social standing, but on proven loyalty and tactical acumen. These men, in turn, became the pillars upon which the new army would stand. Drills, strategies, and the careful distribution of resources transformed Abdullah's motley band into a coherent force. Even the simple act of communal living, shared meals, coordinated watch shifts, and synchronized training began to create bonds that transcended mere obligation. The physical presence of the army was important, but Abdullah also invested in intelligence and diplomacy. Scouts were dispatched to observe movements in Yathrib, reporting back the strengths and weaknesses of potential opponents. Alliances were quietly nurtured with tribes that had grievances against the Prophet's followers, offering mutual benefits without drawing immediate attention. Abdullah's approach was patient, almost surgical. He understood that a premature clash could spell disaster, whereas careful preparation might tip the scales in his favor. Every conversation, every promise, every calculated gesture was a step toward consolidating a force capable of challenging authority, not just in appearance, but in substance. Yet, despite the growing numbers and structured ranks, Abdullah felt the weight of inevitability pressing upon him. He knew that rebuilding an army was more than assembling warriors. It was a test of his own character. Would he once again allow ambition to outpace prudence? Could he instill in his followers a sense of unity without resorting to fear alone? These were the questions that haunted him in the quiet hours, when the campfires burned low and the whispers of loyalty were the only sounds. And still, there was a sense of momentum. Each day brought new recruits, tighter coordination, and a faint glimmer of hope. Abdullah's vision of resurgence, once a distant dream, was gradually becoming tangible. The army, modest in size, but formidable in spirit, was beginning to take shape. And as he surveyed the men assembled before him, he recognized that power, once lost, could indeed be reclaimed, so long as patience, strategy, and determination were wielded as deftly as the sword. By the chapter's end, Abdullah's army was no longer a collection of disorganized warriors. It was an emerging force with purpose, discipline, and an ambition that mirrored its leader's own. The stage was set for confrontation, and Abdullah's gaze, sharp and unwavering, lingered on the horizon. Every campfire flicker, every marching footstep, and every whispered plan was a reminder. The game of power was far from over, and he intended to play it better than ever before. The land was restless. Rumors of approaching Crusader forces rippled across the region, carried on the wind like sand over sun-baked plains. Saladin, newly consolidated in Syria and Egypt, felt the tension tighten around him. Unlike the heat of battlefields chronicled in heroic tales, these early clashes were quieter, woven from anticipation, preparation, and the slow grind of logistics. The Crusaders were formidable, their reputation preceding them, yet Saladin's approach was measured, almost contemplative. He knew that rash action could undo months of careful planning and unity. His generals brought news each day, small skirmishes, raids along supply lines, and scouts reporting unusual troop movements. Saladin listened more than he spoke, absorbing details and weighing each report with precision. He had learned the cost of overconfidence. Victories gained too easily were often followed by unforeseen setbacks. And so, rather than rushing into confrontation, he strengthened his encampments, refined defensive positions, and ensured communication lines were clear between provinces. Every horse, every rider, every messenger carried not only supplies, but intelligence, reinforcing a network that was as much about observation as offense. Evenings were filled with strategic discussions. Maps were unfurled on the ground, waxed tablets marked with arrows and symbols denoting terrain and river crossings. Saladin's mind was meticulous, cataloging potential threats, the temperament of commanders, and the shifting allegiances of neighboring tribes. He encouraged his men to anticipate, adapt, and respect the enemy without losing confidence in themselves. The army's training sessions became exercises in discipline, focusing on cohesion over aggression. Each day reinforced a principle that would define Saladin throughout his campaigns. Victory was rooted in patience, timing, and a careful understanding of the human as much as the martial landscape. Yet the psychological toll was visible. Soldiers, many far from home, wrestled with fear, longing, and uncertainty. Saladin moved among them, not as a distant sultan, but as a presence of reassurance. He spoke quietly about purpose, duty, and honor, reminding them that their strength was not merely in arms, but in the cause they served. Night watches along the desert fringes became both safeguard and meditation, a space where minds prepared for eventual confrontation without succumbing to restlessness. The skirmishes themselves were brief, almost tactical by nature, leaving more marks on morale than on bodies. Supply caravans intercepted, messages disrupted, small encampments probed, but no single clash defined the early campaigns. Each encounter was a test of patience, teaching Saladin's men to read the rhythms of war, to anticipate rather than react. And in these moments, Saladin's restraint shone. He avoided needless provocation, understanding that premature aggression could fracture the fragile alliances he had nurtured and compromise the larger strategy that aimed far beyond immediate triumph. Even after the skirmishes ended, the aftermath lingered in subtler ways. Camps smelled of dust, sweat, and smoke from signal fires. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones, dissecting each movement and considering what might have been. Saladin wandered among them, silent and observant, contemplating not just the tactical outcomes, but the ethical dimensions of war. Mercy, patience, and honor became as vital to his leadership as swordsmanship and siegecraft. In the quiet moments between the clashes, Saladin felt his own spiritual life deepen. The looming threat of conflict reminded him of the fleeting nature of power and the enduring weight of responsibility. His prayers grew longer, his reflection more deliberate, as if each act of devotion reinforced the patience he demanded of his army. He understood that true victory required more than the battlefield. It demanded clarity of purpose, moral conviction, and an unshakable inner calm. As the early confrontations with the Crusaders came to a temporary pause, Saladin's forces were not yet tested in full-scale battle, but the foundation had been laid. Discipline, strategy, and restraint had been forged in these initial encounters, preparing both men and leader for the trials that would come. The horizon remained tense, the future uncertain, but Saladin's resolve had crystallized. He would meet the challenges ahead not only with strength, but with the wisdom that tempered ambition with patience and foresight. As the desert night stretched across the horizon, Saladin found a quietude that the daytime chaos of armies could never offer. Candlelight flickered against the walls of his tent, casting soft shadows that danced with the rhythm of the wind outside. The clatter of hooves and distant shouts faded into memory, leaving only the hushed resonance of his own breathing and the rustle of fabric in the dim glow. These were the hours when Saladin turned inward, when the weight of leadership gave way to contemplation and devotion. He would sit cross-legged on a simple mat, Quran in hand, letting the cadence of recitation guide his thoughts. The verses carried him beyond the reach of political ambition, beyond the demands of strategy and diplomacy. Each word echoed not just in his ears, but in the chambers of his mind, intertwining with dreams of justice, unity, and mercy. The rhythms of prayer became a map of reflection, a structure within which he could examine the choices of the day and anticipate those of the morrow. The world of armies and alliances existed outside this sacred circle. Inside, he found clarity. Dreams accompanied these meditative nights, weaving images of cities united under fair governance, of disputes settled with wisdom rather than bloodshed. He imagined families walking safely along market streets, children playing without fear, scholars debating under open courtyards. These visions were not mere fantasies. They were blueprints of aspiration, guiding the decisions he would make when the sun returned and the responsibilities of rule resumed. Each flicker of candlelight seemed to illuminate a corner of the future, a potential shaped not by force alone, but by patience, discernment, and compassion. In the quiet hours, Saladin also confronted the burdens of his position. Letters from distant governors lay unopened on a small wooden table. Petitions from citizens piled in neat stacks, each demanding attention, judgment, or mercy. He reflected on the fragility of human life, the inevitability of conflict, and the paradox of power. Those entrusted with authority often bore the heaviest solitude. Yet he did not shy away from this loneliness. Instead, he welcomed it as part of the discipline required of a just leader. It tempered pride, grounded ambition, and reminded him that true strength could coexist with humility. The rhythmic chanting of prayers offered a contrast to the practical concerns of leadership, creating an inner harmony that Saladin cultivated deliberately. He found meaning in the silence between phrases, in the soft crackle of oil lamps, in the steady beating of his own heart. These moments reinforced a vision of leadership, not defined solely by conquest, but by integrity, foresight, and the delicate balance between mercy and firmness. The nights shaped not just the man, but the ruler he aspired to become. Occasionally, these nights carried him further, into a landscape of memory and anticipation. He recalled mentors and past victories, the lessons of patience and restraint they had imparted. He considered the men he commanded, the diverse tribes and communities whose loyalty he had earned and maintained through careful negotiation and respect. Each prayer, each meditation, strengthened the thread connecting his inner life to the outer responsibilities of governance. Even in solitude, he felt a presence, a sense that his path was guided, that the choices he faced were part of a larger design. As dawn approached, candlelight fading and the first hints of sunlight brushing the horizon, Saladin would rise quietly, carrying with him the serenity of the night. His decisions would be informed by reflection, his judgments by compassion, and his strategies by patience. The spiritual discipline cultivated during these hours became a reservoir from which he drew the wisdom and resilience needed to unify regions, lead armies, and navigate the treacherous currents of politics. In the silence of those nights, Saladin glimpsed the enduring principle that would define his reign. True power is inseparable from the soul's cultivation. The prayers, the contemplation, and the dreams of justice were not escapes from duty, but the very foundation of it. From these hours of reflection, the vision that would one day unify Syria and Egypt began to crystallize, a vision rooted in mercy, foresight, and unwavering devotion to a cause larger than himself. The dream of unity that had taken root in Saladin's nights of prayer now emerged in the daylight, no longer an abstract meditation, but a tangible goal to be pursued with purpose and strategy. Syria and Egypt, though geographically close, were separated by history, culture, and competing loyalties. Fragmented tribes, local governors, and distant rulers each pursued their own interests. To weave them into a coherent alliance required patience, diplomacy, and an acute sense of timing. Saladin understood that brute force alone could never secure lasting unity. It was in the subtleties of negotiation, trust, and shared vision that his strength truly lay. His first steps were cautious. Envoys were dispatched to neighboring rulers with messages of respect, proposing cooperation rather than submission. Tribes that had long resisted central authority were approached not as subjects to be commanded, but as partners in a broader enterprise. Saladin's reputation as a just and honorable leader preceded him, softening resistance and opening doors that might have remained closed to a less disciplined or more impatient ruler. Each dialogue was deliberate, each promise measured, ensuring that loyalty could be earned without coercion. At the same time, Saladin cultivated alliances through marriage, mentorship, and shared religious and cultural values. Scholars, judges, and clerics were consulted, their opinions shaping policies that balanced justice with pragmatism. Military commanders were trained not only to lead in battle, but to act as agents of unification, mediating disputes and encouraging cooperation among the diverse factions. Through these measures, Saladin built networks of influence that were as much about loyalty of the mind as obedience of the sword. The strategic deployment of resources reinforced his vision. Supply lines were strengthened, fortifications improved, and trade encouraged between regions. These practical measures ensured that loyalty was reinforced not just by ideals, but by tangible benefits, creating a web of interdependence that made unity appealing as well as necessary. Saladin's planning extended beyond immediate threats, anticipating challenges from both internal rivals and external forces. Every decision reflected the delicate balance between preparation for conflict and the cultivation of trust. Diplomatic missions often required patience and subtlety. Meetings could last hours or days, with tea poured, verses recited, and stories shared before matters of state were discussed. Saladin observed every gesture, every nuance, understanding that respect could be conveyed as powerfully through attentiveness and courtesy as through displays of military might. Alliances were strengthened not only by promises, but by consistent demonstration of integrity. an essential foundation for the long-term stability he envisioned. Yet the vision was not without challenges. Factions tested his patience. External threats demanded vigilance, and not all proposals met with immediate acceptance. Saladin responded with a combination of firmness and flexibility, willing to compromise on minor points to secure larger objectives. His approach reflected a deep understanding of human nature. Fear, ambition, pride, and hope were all forces to be acknowledged, directed, and harmonized. In these careful calculations, he displayed a rare balance between pragmatism and idealism, between strategy and morality. As alliances solidified and messages of support reached from Cairo to Damascus, Saladin began to glimpse the potential of a unified realm. His vision encompassed more than the absence of conflict. It included governance rooted in justice, cities connected by trade and communication, and an army loyal not merely to a ruler, but to a shared purpose. The dream that had inspired long nights of reflection was now taking shape in the tangible world, a testament to foresight, patience, and the disciplined cultivation of both mind and soul. With Syria and Egypt gradually aligned under his leadership, Saladin's attention turned toward Damascus, a city of history, culture, and strategic significance. The road ahead would require careful planning, both to secure loyalty and to demonstrate that his vision of unity was both achievable and enduring. The seeds sown in diplomacy, alliance, and moral authority promised not only to strengthen his position, but to prepare the foundation for a realm capable of resisting external threats, advancing justice, and enduring long beyond his own lifetime. The road to Damascus stretched before Saladin like a ribbon of memory and anticipation. As he approached the city, its familiar skyline emerged against the fading light of dusk. Minarets catching the last golden rays, terraced rooftops stacked like ancient stone puzzles, and the gentle murmur of the Barada River threading through the heart of the city. Each landmark stirred a mix of nostalgia and determination within him. This was not simply a conquest. It was a homecoming, a reclamation of a place that embodied both history and potential. The gates opened with respectful ceremony, a gesture acknowledging both his military acumen and the moral authority he had cultivated through diplomacy. Citizens lined the streets, some curious, some cautious, but all attentive to the figure who now returned as their ruler. Saladin moved among them with measured steps, aware that leadership was not merely asserted from above, but earned through presence, attention, and the demonstration of fairness. Smiles and nods were returned with calm grace, and even those who harbored doubts could sense the steady confidence he radiated. Evenings in Damascus were filled with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the tension of campaigns. Lanterns glimmered in courtyards where poets recited verses echoing both history and hope. Scholars debated philosophy, jurisprudence, and theology beneath the stars, their voices blending with the soft call of prayer. Saladin often sat quietly among them, listening, observing, and occasionally offering insights that reflected both his worldly experience and his spiritual reflections. These gatherings were not mere ornamentation. They were the lifeblood of a city seeking guidance, balance, and unity under a ruler who valued intellect and compassion as much as strength. The administration of the city occupied the daylight hours. Letters arrived from distant governors, petitions flowed from citizens, and matters of trade, defense, and justice demanded his attention. Saladin approached each task with meticulous care, knowing that fairness and efficiency would solidify the loyalty he had worked so hard to cultivate. Markets flourished under his watchful eye, ensuring that trade and sustenance strengthened both the economy and the bonds between citizens and state. Even in routine governance, he recognized an opportunity to inspire, to lead by example, and to model the integration of moral integrity with practical wisdom. Yet Damascus also reminded him of the fragility of peace. News from beyond the city walls spoke of crusader movements, of skirmishes and raids that threatened the broader region. Saladin absorbed these reports without haste, understanding that panic could undo the calm and cohesion he had nurtured. Strategy, patience, and measured response remained his tools, complemented by the moral and spiritual discipline that had guided him through nights of prayer and reflection. Damascus was both sanctuary and launchpad, offering both respite and a base from which the next stage of his vision would unfold. The city's evenings, however, were perhaps most memorable for their intimate moments of reflection. In candlelit chambers, he would review reports, meditate on religious texts, or simply allow his mind to wander over the pathways that had led him to this point. Dreams of justice, unity, and the well-being of his people lingered in these quiet hours, merging with the tangible responsibilities of rule. The city's rhythms, the soft hum of conversation, the distant toll of prayer, the gentle splash of water from fountains, created a serene backdrop against which both personal and political insights took shape. As Damascus embraced its new chapter under Saladin, he recognized the delicate balance between governance and the cultivation of human spirit. Leadership was not defined solely by the strength of arms or the efficiency of administration, but by the capacity to nurture loyalty, trust, and shared purpose. Here, in a city rich with history and culture, he found the synthesis of strategy and morality, ambition and restraint that would define the legacy he aspired to leave. Yet even as the city exhaled in relief and celebration, the horizon was never far from his mind. Reports of escalating crusader activity reminded him that peace was often temporary, that vigilance was eternal. Damascus offered him refuge and inspiration, but it also demanded readiness. The threads of diplomacy, preparation, and spiritual discipline intertwined, creating a tapestry that would support him in the trials yet to come. And as the candlelight flickered one final time, Saladin's gaze extended beyond the city walls, toward the challenges that awaited, the continuing journey of leadership, unity, and history in the making. The weight of leadership settled on Saladin's shoulders like the quiet heaviness of a summer afternoon before a storm. Damascus was secured, alliances solidifying, and the foundations of unity taking shape. But the demands of governance were relentless. Letters arrived daily, a cascade of petitions, grievances, and requests from citizens, governors, and distant allies. Each required attention, judgment, and often delicate compromise. In these seemingly mundane tasks, the stakes were profound. A misstep could erode loyalty, incite rebellion, or jeopardize months of painstaking diplomacy. Mornings began with audiences. Citizens came seeking justice. Merchants negotiated trade agreements, and tribal leaders sought guidance on disputes that spanned generations. Saladin listened carefully, weighing not just the facts, but the human elements behind each claim. His ability to discern truth from exaggeration, intention from pretense, became a daily exercise in patience, empathy, and prudence. Even minor decisions could ripple outward, affecting morale, public perception, and the fragile web of alliances he had cultivated. Leadership was a practice of attention, noticing details, anticipating consequences, and balancing competing interests with a steady hand. Afternoons often passed in correspondence. Reports from governors described troop movements, economic shifts, or tensions brewing on the peripheries. Each letter was read meticulously, annotations made, plans drafted, and strategies adjusted. Saladin's advisors offered counsel, yet he remained the final arbiter. This responsibility was exhausting in its breadth, demanding both mental acuity and emotional resilience. The weight of countless lives and ambitions pressed constantly, a silent companion to every decision. There was no pause, no release from the duty of care, only the continuation of vigilance. Meetings with military commanders, clerics, and foreign emissaries filled the evenings. Here, strategy and morality intersected. Campaigns had to be planned with foresight, resources allocated with precision, and alliances managed with diplomacy. But beyond logistics and tactical calculations, Saladin weighed the ethical implications of every choice. Would the action bring justice or merely serve ambition? Could a decision harm the innocent while achieving military objectives? These were questions that demanded more than intellect. They required judgment informed by conscience and faith. Even in moments of solitude, the burdens lingered. Walks through Damascus at night offered little relief. The city's streets whispered reminders of responsibility. He considered the welfare of soldiers far from home, the families of those who had perished in earlier conflicts, and the potential fallout of decisions made under pressure. Leadership was not merely about command. It was about sustaining trust, upholding justice, and maintaining the moral compass that had guided him through years of upheaval and warfare. Each day's choices became threads woven into a tapestry of accountability that could neither be unraveled nor ignored. The psychological strain manifested subtly: restless sleep, brief irritations, or prolonged reflection. Saladin was aware that personal discipline and inner calm were essential, not only for his own well-being, but for the example he set. A leader's burden was contagious. The tone, temperament, and resolve of a ruler could influence the courage, loyalty, and morale of an entire realm. Thus, his patience, temperance, and measured judgment were as critical to unity as any military maneuver or diplomatic treaty. Yet, amid the endless letters, meetings, and petitions, there was a quiet satisfaction. Saladin recognized the significance of his role, not as a master of cities or armies alone, but as a steward of justice and harmony. The challenges, though taxing, affirmed the purpose that had guided him from his earliest reflections in prayer and contemplation. Every decision, every negotiation, every carefully considered judgment reinforced the fragile equilibrium he sought to maintain. And as the day drew to a close, Saladin would often retreat to the quiet of his tent or a chamber lined with the wisdom of scholars. Here, he could reflect on the weight he bore and draw strength from faith, experience, and the steady rhythm of routine. Leadership was neither simple nor solitary. It was a continuous balancing of human needs, strategic vision, and moral integrity. Yet in embracing this burden, Saladin shaped not only his own legacy, but the destiny of the lands he governed, preparing for the trials and triumphs that lay ahead. The desert stretched endlessly under the rising sun, a canvas of ochre and gold upon which the movements of men and beasts created subtle patterns of order. Saladin's forces, though disciplined, were still in motion, gathering strength and cohesion for the trials ahead. The assembly of an army was an art as much as a strategy, a choreography of timing, morale, and trust. Each horse's hoof-fall, each wagon's creak, and each whispered order contributed to a larger rhythm, a prelude to confrontation that was measured and deliberate rather than chaotic. Encampments were meticulously arranged. Tents were spaced to allow communication, access, and rapid deployment. Supply lines were reinforced, water and grain distributed with careful attention, and scouts dispatched to monitor both the terrain and the movements of the enemy. Saladin's presence was constant but unobtrusive, moving through rows of soldiers, inspecting horses, and offering quiet encouragement. Discipline was cultivated not through fear, but through example, ensuring that every man understood the purpose behind the painstaking preparations. The atmosphere, though tense, was layered with anticipation rather than panic. Commanders huddled in the shade of tents, discussing formations and contingency plans, their gestures precise and deliberate. Maps spread across low tables displayed rivers, hills, and passes, each mark considered in relation to the enemy's likely approach. Saladin listened more than he spoke, interjecting with questions that clarified strategy and encouraged critical thinking. The subtle exchange of ideas reinforced cohesion, allowing each soldier to grasp not only orders, but the reasoning behind them. Horses neighed and pawed at the sand, their energy echoing the soldiers' own restlessness. Men sharpened blades, adjusted armor, and rehearsed signals that would coordinate movements across vast stretches of land. Yet there was also a quiet ritual to these preparations. The evening breeze carried the scent of burning herbs, the clink of metal on metal, and the muted hum of prayers. Saladin encouraged both physical readiness and mental composure, understanding that confidence was as much cultivated in spirit as in muscle. Among the ranks, camaraderie flourished in small human gestures. Soldiers shared stories of home, reminded one another of past victories, and exchanged subtle reassurances. Morale was nurtured deliberately. A confident, disciplined force could withstand uncertainty better than a larger but unsettled one. Saladin moved through these moments with care, aware that leadership extended beyond strategic oversight into the cultivation of trust, loyalty, and courage. Night brought a different rhythm. Campfires flickered like constellations on the desert floor, casting long shadows over tents and sand. The soft murmur of voices reciting prayers or discussing strategy mingled with the crackle of fire. Saladin often walked among the flames, contemplating the path ahead. He considered the geography, the temperament of his men, and the psychology of the opposing forces. These reflections were not idle. They shaped every decision, from the positioning of cavalry to the timing of supply caravans. Preparation, he knew, was inseparable from foresight. Even the smallest details received attention. Water rations calculated with precision, scouts' reports cross-referenced with terrain, signals rehearsed to avoid confusion in the heat of day. The army became a living organism, each part interconnected, each individual understanding his role within the whole. And above it all, Saladin's calm presence provided a steadying influence, a reminder that purpose and patience were as vital as swords and spears. By dawn, the stage was set. The army, though still poised and restrained, had acquired coherence, readiness, and a sense of inevitability. Men and horses alike felt the tension, the anticipation of the coming trials, yet were grounded in the discipline and strategy that Saladin had instilled. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first movements to ripple across its sands. In these quiet, purposeful hours, the foundations of victory were forged, not in immediate battle, but in preparation, unity, and the steady orchestration of a leader's vision. The journey to Hattin was long, oppressive, and unrelenting. The desert sun beat down upon the soldiers, turning the sand into a radiant sea that shimmered under its glare. Dust rose in faint clouds with each step of hooves and boots, drifting across tired faces and parched throats. The army moved as a single organism, disciplined yet weary, every footfall echoing the weight of anticipation that hung in the air. Saladin, at the forefront, observed the procession with measured eyes, noting the subtle strains among men and animals alike, understanding that the journey itself could test endurance as much as the battles to come. Water was scarce, the rivers distant, and the wells uncertain. Every ration became precious, every pause by a stream carefully timed. Commanders calculated not only the route, but the timing of marches, ensuring that exhaustion did not erode discipline or morale. Each day was a lesson in patience, endurance, and adaptation. Soldiers adjusted their pace, exchanged whispered encouragements, and endured the heat with a quiet determination inspired by their leader's presence. Saladin's own stamina became a model. He rode with attention to the smallest signs of fatigue, his calm voice a steadying force against the relentless rhythm of the desert. The psychological landscape was as challenging as the physical one. Whispers of the Crusaders' might traveled ahead of the army, carried by scouts and rumors alike. Soldiers' minds wrestled with fear, anticipation, and the desire to prove themselves. Saladin moved among them, not merely as commander, but as observer and counselor, reinforcing purpose, instilling confidence, and cultivating patience. He reminded his men that victory relied on more than courage alone. It depended on discipline, foresight, and the ability to endure both discomfort and uncertainty. The terrain shifted subtly along the route, offering both opportunities and challenges. Hills rose gradually, commanding views of the surrounding plains, while valleys held shadows and the promise of respite from the sun. Each feature was studied and noted, maps consulted, and scouts dispatched to gather intelligence on both land and enemy movements. Saladin's strategies extended beyond immediate confrontation. He was aware that positioning, timing, and psychological readiness could determine the outcome before swords ever clashed. Encampments at night became sanctuaries of brief relief. Fires flickered, casting long, wavering shadows over the sand. Soldiers cleaned armor, tended to their mounts, and shared small meals, their conversations hushed but laden with reflection. Saladin often walked among them under the stars, listening, observing, and occasionally offering counsel or reassurance. In the quiet, he contemplated the stakes of the approaching battle, the lives entrusted to him, and the broader vision that had guided him from Damascus to this juncture. Every step forward was a convergence of preparation and intention, a silent prelude to what lay ahead. Messages and intelligence flowed steadily. Scouts returned with reports of Crusader movements, assessing their strength, formations, and likely routes. Saladin absorbed each piece of information with careful consideration, revising plans and issuing instructions to ensure readiness. The army's cohesion depended not only on physical endurance, but on mental clarity and trust in leadership. Even the smallest hesitation or misstep could be costly. The desert amplified both error and effort. By the time the army approached the hills of Hattin, the sun hung low, bathing the land in a golden haze. The men's exhaustion was palpable, yet discipline remained unbroken. The physical strain had fused with psychological resolve, forging a collective endurance that mirrored Saladin's own steadfastness. Ahead lay uncertainty, heat, and confrontation, but also the culmination of meticulous planning, strategic patience, and unwavering purpose. The road to Hattin was more than a path through the desert. It was the threshold of destiny, the silent prelude to a confrontation that would shape the course of history. Dawn broke over the hills of Hattin like a pale promise, spilling gold across the rugged terrain. The heat was immediate, pressing upon the soldiers even before the sun fully climbed the sky. Dust hung in the air, lifted by the march of men and horses, turning the landscape into a haze of anticipation and uncertainty. Saladin stood at the forefront, observing the movements of both his army and the enemy. His calm presence, a stabilizing force, amid the tension that crackled like electricity through the ranks. The Crusader forces were visible on the horizon, their banners fluttering and armor glinting in the morning light. Yet the day was not defined solely by their numbers or might. It was shaped by preparation, discipline, and the psychological currents of expectation and fear. Saladin's eyes swept over the terrain, hills, dry riverbeds, and ridges, calculating the advantage each could confer. The battlefield itself was a character in the drama, its heat and dust as potent as any sword or spear. The army moved with coordinated precision. Cavalry units shifted, infantry adjusted formation, and archers took positions that maximized visibility and range. Saladin's voice was measured, his commands deliberate, ensuring that every movement served both strategy and morale. Even in moments when orders were simple, they carried weight, reinforcing the principle that discipline and timing could transform a battle before the first clash of steel. Soldiers, though tense, drew confidence from their leader's steady gaze, his calm energy spreading through the ranks like a silent tide. As the day wore on, the desert heat intensified, blending with the rising dust to create an almost surreal landscape. Shouts, signals, and the occasional clash of weapons punctuated the rhythm of preparation. Smoke from fires and torches mingled with the arid air, carrying the scents of sweat, leather, and metal. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of sunlight off armor added layers of intensity to the unfolding scene. The battle, though not yet fully joined, was already a sensory experience of pressure, anticipation, and controlled chaos. Saladin remained vigilant, observing not only the enemy, but the subtle dynamics within his own ranks. Fatigue, nerves, and anticipation rippled through the men. Small gestures, whispered words, or the positioning of a unit could make the difference between cohesion and confusion. He walked among his soldiers during brief lulls, offering encouragement, reminding them of purpose, and reinforcing the discipline that had been painstakingly cultivated over months of preparation. Morale, he knew, was as critical as physical readiness. The sun climbed higher, and the desert seemed to hum with attention. Dust devils spun across the plain, mirroring the restless energy of the army. Saladin's strategy emphasized patience, to wait for the right moment, to exploit advantage, and to let the enemy's mistakes amplify their vulnerabilities. Every decision was a blend of foresight, instinct, and experience, honed through years of observing the consequences of both action and restraint. When the first clash occurred, it was swift, decisive, and overwhelming. Yet the focus was never on gore or spectacle. It was on the controlled execution of a plan that had been meticulously prepared. Shouts, the clash of armor, and the rhythmic thrum of hooves combined with the heat, dust, and smoke to create an intense tapestry of sensory detail. Amid this, Saladin's calm remained unshaken, guiding the ebb and flow of the day with an unyielding clarity of purpose. By evening, the battlefield had shifted, not only in physical terms but in consequence. The Crusader forces, though formidable, had been outmaneuvered, exhausted, and compelled to submit. Victory, achieved with strategy and patience rather than recklessness, opened the path toward Jerusalem and reshaped the political landscape. Saladin's discipline, foresight, and moral restraint had turned a day of uncertainty into a turning point in history, proving that true power was measured not only in force, but in wisdom, patience, and the unwavering steadiness of leadership. The plains and hills stretched before Saladin's army like a living mosaic, each step carrying them closer to a city steeped in history, faith, and expectation. The victory at Hattin had cleared the path, yet the journey to Jerusalem was far from ceremonial. Pilgrims, merchants, and villagers joined the march, their presence infusing the army with renewed morale and a tangible sense of purpose. Dust rose beneath countless feet and hooves, carrying the combined scent of earth, sweat, and the lingering echoes of battle. The land seemed to hum with anticipation, the city's silhouette always just beyond the horizon of imagination. Saladin moved among the troops, attentive to both the practical and human dimensions of the march. Supply lines had to remain secure, water carefully rationed, and horses monitored for fatigue. Yet he also recognized the spiritual and psychological weight of the journey. Men carried not only arms, but hopes and fears, dreams of justice, and anxieties about what awaited behind the walls of Jerusalem. The march became a living exercise in unity, patience, and discipline, reflecting the leader's own balance of strategic foresight and moral responsibility. The landscape changed subtly as they progressed. Olive groves gave way to dry fields. Streams trickled through their valleys, offering brief respite. Each campsite was selected with care, balancing access to water, defensibility, and logistical convenience. Saladin's presence during these halts reassured the soldiers. He walked among them, offering counsel, observing interactions, and quietly reinforcing the discipline and cohesion that had been cultivated over months of preparation. Trust, he knew, was as vital a resource as food or water on the long march toward a pivotal city. The pilgrims who accompanied the army added a layer of solemnity and reflection. Children laughed despite the dust and fatigue. Elders offered blessings, and families shared small comforts amid the hardships of travel. Their presence reminded the soldiers that their struggle was not merely political or martial. It was deeply human. Saladin encouraged this connection, understanding that the morale and spiritual purpose of the men could be fortified as much by observation of devotion as by drills or orders. Each step forward was a reinforcement of purpose, a subtle weaving of the temporal and the spiritual. Camaraderie grew among the soldiers, reinforced by shared hardships and small rituals. Evenings were spent in quiet reflection, prayers recited under flickering lanterns, and brief discussions held about the terrain, upcoming strategy, and the anticipated challenge of Jerusalem itself. The desert nights carried a cooler air, a respite from the sun's harshness, and offered space for contemplation. Saladin himself often walked along the edges of campfires, absorbing the murmurs of conversation, reflecting on the successes and vulnerabilities of the army, and drawing mental maps that balanced topography, morale, and timing. Messages from scouts kept the march dynamic, providing intelligence on the city's fortifications, local movements, and potential logistical challenges. Saladin considered each report carefully, integrating information with observation and experience. The army's cohesion depended on anticipation as much as action. Each decision, from the pace of the march to the allocation of provisions, reflected a blend of strategy, foresight, and empathy. As the city drew nearer, the air seemed charged with expectancy. Hills and valleys carried the faint scent of cultivated gardens and distant smoke, hints of life within walls that had long been the focus of devotion, ambition, and conflict. Soldiers walked with renewed energy, their steps echoing the combined rhythm of determination and reverence. Saladin's calm, attentive leadership ensured that fatigue did not erode discipline, that anticipation did not spill into recklessness, and that every man understood the importance of the journey as preparation for the decisive moment ahead. By the time the first outlines of Jerusalem appeared against the horizon, the army was a disciplined, cohesive force, morally and physically ready to meet the challenges within its gates. The march had strengthened not only bodies and arms, but spirits and resolve. Ahead, lay the culmination of strategy, patience, and human endurance. A city whose gates carried not only stones and walls, but centuries of devotion, history, and the promise of mercy tempered by justice. The path toward Jerusalem was more than a physical journey. It was the embodiment of preparation, purpose, and the careful orchestration of leadership that sought to harmonize human ambition with moral responsibility. The gates of Jerusalem loomed ahead, their ancient stones glowing in the soft light of morning. After the long march, the city appeared both majestic and formidable, a place steeped in history, faith, and the weight of countless conflicts. Soldiers and pilgrims alike paused for a moment of silent recognition, aware that what lay beyond those gates would test not only skill and discipline, but also judgment, morality, and leadership. Saladin, mounted upon a horse that had carried him through deserts and skirmishes, surveyed the scene with calm determination. The Crusader defenders were exhausted from previous engagements, their morale shaken by the defeat at Hattin. Rumors of Saladin's approach had preceded him, stirring unease within the city walls. Yet the Sultan did not rush. He understood that victory was not simply taking the gates by force. It was shaping outcomes that would secure peace, stability, and loyalty for generations. His advisors spoke of assault and siege, of storming walls and overwhelming the city with force. Saladin considered these options and then chose a different path, one guided by strategy tempered with mercy. Negotiations began at dawn. Emissaries from Jerusalem approached, bearing terms and requests, cautious yet hopeful. Saladin listened attentively, weighing the conditions, the welfare of the city's inhabitants, and the broader consequences of each decision. He understood that compassion could be a form of power, just as decisive as any sword. The exchange of words was deliberate, measured, and imbued with the gravity of their context. The city's fate rested upon these subtle negotiations as much as upon military strength. Saladin's terms were clear but humane. Civilians would be protected, religious sites preserved, the wounded cared for. Soldiers who surrendered would be treated with dignity, their honor maintained. The Sultan's choice to extend mercy reflected his belief that true leadership is demonstrated not in domination alone, but in restraint, justice, and moral authority. His decisions were informed by long reflection, spiritual discipline, and a recognition that the strength of an army is magnified by the righteousness of its cause. Within the walls, the inhabitants began to sense a shift. Fear and uncertainty were replaced by cautious relief. Families who had anticipated violence now found space for hope. Markets reopened under supervision, and supplies were distributed to those in need. Saladin's presence, visible yet non-threatening, reinforced the principle that authority need not be imposed through fear alone. The city's rhythm resumed, subtly altered, guided by a ruler who understood that stability is nurtured through compassion as much as through governance. Soldiers, too, observed their leader's restraint with respect and reflection. They had marched, endured, and fought, yet they now saw a form of victory that transcended the battlefield. Discipline, patience, and moral clarity had yielded an outcome that bolstered not only strategic advantage, but also honor, reputation, and legitimacy. Saladin's mercy became a silent lesson, a demonstration of leadership that valued wisdom over impulse, long-term unity over immediate gratification. The spiritual dimension of this act was not lost on him. As he moved through the city, Saladin offered prayers of gratitude and reflection, mindful of the responsibility entrusted to him. He considered the fragile balance between power and compassion, ambition and justice. These moments reaffirmed the principle that governance is inseparable from ethical reflection, and that true authority is measured by the ability to temper strength with wisdom. By evening, Jerusalem had been secured without the devastation of prolonged conflict. Soldiers rested, civilians resumed their routines, and the city's pulse returned to a steady rhythm. Saladin's choice of mercy resonated far beyond the walls, spreading throughout the region and even reaching the ears of Europe, signaling a leader whose reputation for justice and humanity rivaled his prowess in war. The gates of Jerusalem had not only been opened, a path was forged for stability, reconciliation, and the enduring legacy of a ruler who balanced power with conscience. News traveled slowly in the medieval world, yet the tale of Jerusalem's surrender under Saladin spread with remarkable speed. Messengers on horseback, cloaked in haste and urgency, carried the account across mountains, rivers, and kingdoms. Each letter, each oral report, carried not only the facts of conquest, but the subtle astonishment of a ruler who had chosen mercy over vengeance. From the courts of France to the halls of England, from the monasteries of Italy to the castles of the Holy Roman Empire, whispers of Saladin's discipline, strategy, and compassion rippled outward, challenging expectations and stirring reflection. European rulers received the news with a mixture of shock, admiration, and anxiety. Crusaders who had hoped for glory and restitution found themselves confronted with a reality that was both unsettling and humbling. Saladin's restraint, the humane treatment of civilians, and the protection of sacred sites undermined the simple narrative of conquest and retaliation that had dominated expectations. Reports described the orderly march, the careful negotiations, and the fairness extended even to former enemies. Such tales were both inspiring and disquieting, hinting at a form of power grounded in wisdom as much as in strength. Letters from the continent carried the story further, reaching the hands of monarchs, clergy, and knights alike. Some accounts emphasized the efficiency and strategy of Saladin's campaigns, highlighting the meticulous preparation and discipline that had led to Hattin and the subsequent march to Jerusalem. Others focused on the moral dimension. A conqueror whose restraint and respect for life set a standard that defied conventional understanding of war. Chroniclers debated and embellished, each interpretation colored by perspective, yet all reflected a profound impression of a leader whose actions transcended mere territorial gain. In courts and monasteries, the story provoked reflection on leadership, morality, and divine favor. Advisors counseled rulers on the implications of Saladin's conduct, noting that strength untempered by justice might yield temporary victories, but could never command enduring respect. Scholars and clerics pondered the philosophical dimensions, questioning the nature of honor, chivalry, and righteousness. Even knights, whose lives had been defined by combat and oaths, found themselves reconsidering the qualities that defined a true leader. The echo of Jerusalem's surrender reverberated not only across geography, but across minds, reshaping ideals of governance, power, and virtue. The accounts also spurred preparation for the future. Plans for renewed campaigns, alliances, and strategies to reclaim lost territories began to take shape, informed by both admiration and caution. Yet beneath the political calculations, there lingered an awareness that Saladin's approach had set a precedent difficult to emulate. Mercy, discipline, and strategic patience had proven to be powerful instruments in ways that brute force alone could never achieve. The echoes of these lessons would influence decisions, policies, and attitudes in the years to come. Travelers, merchants, and pilgrims who had witnessed the aftermath brought stories back to their homelands, adding detail and color to the narrative. Tales of orderly streets, protected civilians, and the disciplined conduct of soldiers painted a picture of Jerusalem that contrasted sharply with previous sieges. Saladin's reputation spread not only through political channels, but through the lived experiences of those who had seen his leadership firsthand. The resonance of his actions became a part of European consciousness, shaping perceptions of the Islamic world and the qualities of a ruler worthy of respect. Ultimately, these echoes served as a mirror reflecting both admiration and envy. They conveyed the complexity of human leadership. That power could be exercised with justice. That discipline could coexist with compassion. And that reputation could be forged as much by moral choice as by victory in battle. Across Europe, the story of Jerusalem under Saladin challenged expectations, inspired contemplation, and laid the groundwork for encounters, negotiations, and rivalries yet to come. It was a reminder that history is shaped not only by triumph, but by the principles guiding those who lead. The news of Saladin's victory and mercy in Jerusalem reached Europe as both inspiration and provocation. Among those stirred by these reports was Richard, Duke of Aquitaine, soon to be King of England, whose reputation for courage, martial skill, and relentless determination had preceded him across the continent. Tales of Saladin's discipline and fairness intrigued Richard, not as mere curiosity, but as a challenge, a worthy adversary whose intellect and morality demanded recognition alongside strength. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become legendary, not merely for battles fought, but for the character of the men involved. Richard was a figure of contrasts, bold yet calculating, fierce yet capable of reflection. Courtiers admired his presence and valor, while adversaries feared the speed and decisiveness with which he acted. His charisma inspired loyalty among knights and soldiers, yet his impatience and fiery temper could unsettle even the most experienced advisors. Reports of Saladin's conduct reached him through letters, envoys, and chronicles, each emphasizing strategic brilliance paired with ethical restraint. Richard saw in these accounts not weakness, but a mirror for his own ideals of honor, valor, and leadership. The notion of a leader who could combine military acumen with ethical judgment fascinated Richard. In the councils of his own court, he debated the implications of Saladin's victories and the potential consequences of campaigns to reclaim Jerusalem. Knights and nobles discussed the upcoming crusade in hushed tones, aware that their enemy was no ordinary opponent. Yet admiration did not diminish resolve. Rather, it sharpened it. Richard approached the Third Crusade with both anticipation and careful calculation, understanding that the clash would test skill, strategy, and moral authority alike. Before their forces met on the battlefield, Richard and Saladin engaged in indirect exchanges, sending letters through envoys that conveyed respect, warnings, and subtle challenges. Each word was chosen deliberately, reflecting intellect, cultural awareness, and strategic insight. These communications became an arena of their own, a space where diplomacy, morality, and reputation were as important as any sword or siege. The mutual acknowledgement of each other's skill laid the groundwork for a rivalry tempered by admiration rather than blind hatred, a rare, complex form of respect that defined the interaction of two great leaders. Richard's preparation for the campaign involved more than military logistics. He studied reports of terrain, supply lines, and the disposition of Saladin's forces. He trained his knights rigorously, fostering discipline and cohesion, and he engaged in prayer and reflection, mindful that courage alone would not secure victory. Every aspect of the march, the planning, and the eventual engagement with Saladin's forces was suffused with strategy, foresight, and the awareness that leadership is tested as much in patience and judgment as in combat. The encounter of these two leaders would become defined by a blend of competition and mutual respect. Their reputations preceded them, influencing both allies and enemies. Soldiers and courtiers recognized that these were men whose actions would define the character of an entire campaign, whose decisions would ripple across kingdoms and faiths. Richard's bravery was matched by Saladin's restraint. Richard's decisiveness countered by Saladin's strategic patience. In this contrast, each leader found not only opposition, but inspiration, a reflection of ideals that shaped their decisions and tempered their approach. In the moments before the armies met in earnest, the tension was both palpable and electric. Every march, every camp, every council of war carried the weight of anticipation. Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, though separated by geography and culture, were linked by the demands of leadership, the weight of responsibility, and the awareness that their legacies would be measured by both action and principle. This convergence of two titans of history marked the rise of the Third Crusade, not as a simple contest of arms, but as a stage upon which intellect, valor, morality, and strategy would intertwine, shaping events far beyond the battlefield. The Third Crusade unfolded as much in councils and letters as on open plains. Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, each a master of strategy, engaged in a subtle duel that transcended the clash of swords. Every maneuver, every encampment, and every feint carried layers of intent. The battlefield became a chessboard, with hills, rivers, and passes serving as pieces to be moved with foresight. Victory depended not merely on strength, but on timing, anticipation, and the careful orchestration of resources and morale. Skirmishes punctuated the long stretches of maneuvering, yet these were often calculated tests rather than full-scale confrontations. Cavalry scouts probed positions, archers harassed supply lines, and small contingents engaged in staged encounters to gauge response. Saladin observed each action with measured eyes, interpreting not only the physical outcomes, but the psychological implications. Richard, equally astute, countered with feints and redeployments, testing the limits of Saladin's patience and the resilience of his army. In this war of wits, every decision was magnified, and every miscalculation could ripple across both camps with unforeseen consequences. The interplay of terrain and timing became a language both leaders spoke fluently. Hills offered vantage points, valleys concealed movements, and rivers dictated the rhythm of engagement. Saladin's meticulous attention to detail ensured that his army moved in coordination, that supply lines remained secure, and that soldiers understood their roles beyond the immediate clash of arms. Richard, aware of Saladin's discipline, sought openings through deception, speed, and selective pressure. Each encounter reinforced the understanding that intellect could shape outcomes as decisively as any sword. Correspondence between the two leaders further illustrated the nuanced dimension of their rivalry. Messages, often delivered under flags of truce, carried respect as well as challenge. Saladin commended bravery and strategic acumen. Richard acknowledged careful planning and restraint. The exchange of letters became an extension of the battlefield, a space in which diplomacy, honor, and reputation intertwined. Both men understood that perception mattered, the morale of their own troops, the loyalty of allies, and the judgment of posterity depended as much on these acts as on combat itself. Within their armies, discipline and observation mirrored the leader's focus. Soldiers learned to anticipate movements, respond to cues, and maintain cohesion under stress. Training, communication, and shared purpose were emphasized above bravado. Saladin's calm presence and Richard's bold decisiveness each radiated through their respective forces, shaping behavior, guiding decisions, and reinforcing morale. The interplay of leadership, strategy, and psychology became as critical as the physical exertions of war. Weather and environment played their own role in this intricate dance. Sun, dust, and heat tested endurance. The topology dictated movement. The subtle shifts of wind could betray or conceal intentions. Saladin considered these elements as allies, integrating them into his strategic calculations, just as Richard did with equal attentiveness. Both men were aware that mastery of circumstance, timing, terrain, and perception could tilt the balance as effectively as any sword strike. Even in moments of pause, the contest of minds continued. Meetings of council, the review of scouts' reports, and observation of the enemy's routines became exercises in anticipation and deduction. Each leader sought not merely to counter the other, but to predict, influence, and shape decisions before they were made. The war was therefore as much a contest of intellect as it was of strength, a reminder that true command required patience, insight, and moral clarity. As the campaigns extended, a growing admiration developed between the two leaders. Respect for courage, strategic brilliance, and ethical restraint tempered rivalry with acknowledgement of shared values. Battles of wits, not just weapons, defined the Third Crusade, demonstrating that the most enduring victories were those achieved through foresight, intellect, and the disciplined application of both. In this interplay of minds and armies, history would remember not only the clashes of swords, but the subtle, profound contest of two extraordinary leaders. In the midst of campaigns, when dust settled and the sun dipped low, Saladin and Richard, the Lionheart, engaged in a dialogue that transcended battle. Letters traveled between their camps, carried by envoys under flags of truce. Each message was deliberate, measured, and laden with subtle meaning. They spoke of strategy, of observations, and occasionally of admiration, creating a channel of communication that revealed not just tactics, but character. Through these exchanges, both men recognized qualities in the other that demanded respect, even amid the tension of war. The correspondence was never casual. Every word was chosen with care, conveying intelligence while maintaining honor. Saladin praised courage and discipline, emphasizing the value of prudence and moral consideration in decision-making. Richard acknowledged strategic brilliance and fairness, noting the skill required to command both men and territory with consistency and purpose. These letters became a mirror, reflecting the values and priorities that guided each leader. Strength tempered by conscience, decisiveness guided by insight, and ambition bounded by principle. Soldiers and advisors watched these exchanges with fascination. Though physically separated by miles of desert and opposing banners, their leaders engaged in a subtler form of contest, one in which intellect, restraint, and reputation were as crucial as swords and arrows. The letters reinforced the idea that leadership encompassed more than battlefield victories. It required foresight, moral clarity, and the ability to influence outcomes without direct force. Both Saladin and Richard demonstrated that respect and rivalry could coexist, each enhancing the other's stature. The letters occasionally carried advice or caution, drawn from keen observation of the enemy's habits and the terrain. Saladin's messages reminded Richard of the importance of patience, supply management, and consideration for civilians, while Richard's correspondence highlighted the value of timing, morale, and decisive action. In reading these notes, each leader gained insights not only into the other's strategies, but also into the character, temperament, and priorities that shaped their decisions. Trust was measured not by blind allegiance, but by understanding and acknowledgement of integrity. Beyond strategy, the letters revealed a shared recognition of the human dimension of war. Both leaders understood that soldiers and civilians alike bore the consequences of command. Saladin's tone emphasized compassion and restraint, advocating for the protection of non-combatants and the fair treatment of prisoners. Richard's responses reflected awareness of honor and ethical responsibility, demonstrating that courage need not forsake principle. In this correspondence, the abstract ideals of chivalry, leadership, and morality became tangible, shaping both perception and action across the theaters of conflict. Over time, these letters fostered a nuanced form of camaraderie. Mutual respect grew not from personal friendship alone, but from recognition of each other's competence, restraint, and commitment to justice. They acknowledged the limitations and challenges of their own positions while honoring the skill and judgment required of the other. Through careful words and deliberate phrasing, a bond formed, a professional admiration that transcended enmity and underscored the rare meeting of two exceptional minds on the stage of history. The impact extended beyond their personal understanding. Soldiers, allies, and chroniclers noted these exchanges, observing that true leadership included reflection, communication, and ethical consideration as much as martial prowess. Tales of correspondence traveled ahead of armies, shaping reputations and tempering perceptions of conflict. The letters became an enduring symbol of the balance between intellect and action, respect and rivalry, reminding all that history is influenced not only by victories on the field, but by the principles and decisions exercised in private reflection. In the end, these letters across enemy lines created a space where diplomacy, morality, and strategy intertwined. They demonstrated that even in the heat of war, leadership could embrace intelligence, honor, and mutual recognition. For Saladin and Richard, the written word became another instrument of power, an extension of foresight and wisdom, and a testament to the extraordinary blend of skill, patience, and ethical clarity that defined their legacy. The Third Crusade had entered a rhythm that was as taxing as any battle. Armies faced each other across valleys and hills, separated by miles yet linked through tension, vigilance, and the slow calculus of strategy. Days stretched into weeks, the sun scorching and the nights heavy with uncertainty. Supply lines were monitored with care. Scouts moved like shadows across the landscape, and commanders weighed each decision against both opportunity and risk. The standoff itself became a crucible, testing endurance, patience, and the resolve of leaders and soldiers alike. For Saladin, the long standoff demanded vigilance beyond the ordinary. Every movement of the enemy was scrutinized, every rumor evaluated, every report cross-referenced. He understood that impatience could undo months of careful planning, that a misjudged advance or a poorly timed maneuver could erode morale or expose vulnerabilities. His focus extended beyond immediate military advantage to the broader picture: morale, discipline, political perception, and the ethical implications of every choice. Leadership was not measured by action alone, but by restraint, foresight, and composure under pressure. The soldiers experienced the standoff as a test of both physical and mental endurance. Dust and heat strained muscles, supply shortages demanded careful rationing, and the monotony of waiting threatened to erode morale. Small skirmishes flared occasionally, more to probe defenses than to achieve decisive victories. Each engagement reinforced lessons in coordination, discipline, and observation. The long standoff became a living classroom where patience, adaptability, and anticipation were as crucial as any sword or spear. Richard the Lionheart confronted the same challenges. His forces mirrored Saladin's in strength, discipline, and awareness. Yet the heat of expectation pressed heavily. The standoff was not merely a pause in action, but a psychological battlefield. Negotiations, subtle maneuvers, and calculated displays of force created a tension that tested loyalty, endurance, and judgment. Richard's charisma maintained cohesion, yet he, like Saladin, had to guard against overextension, rash decisions, and the erosion of morale over time. The standoff was as much a contest of will as a preparation for combat. Amid the waiting, the leaders communicated indirectly, observing each other's movements, interpreting signs, and maintaining a dialogue of strategy. Each camp adjusted positions, reinforced supply lines, and rehearsed contingencies, aware that the eventual engagement would favor the side that had combined preparation with patience. The psychological landscape became as significant as the physical. Confidence, perception, and the ability to withstand stress influenced the outcome as much as swords or archers. The standoff itself shaped strategy, revealing strengths and weaknesses through endurance rather than immediate action. Weather and terrain played subtle but crucial roles. Heat waves and dust stirred across plains, forcing adjustments in marches and positions. Hills offered vantage points for observation. Rivers influenced supply lines, and the desert's unforgiving nature tested every calculation. Saladin considered these elements carefully, integrating them into decisions that balanced tactical advantage with prudence. The long standoff became a lesson in harmony with circumstance, where awareness and adaptability complemented martial skill. As days passed, fatigue mounted, yet cohesion held. Soldiers found routine in small rituals, tending horses, cleaning armor, exchanging whispered conversation, reciting prayers. Leaders reinforced morale, reminding troops that patience, discipline, and awareness were themselves forms of power. In this prolonged pause, both armies demonstrated that mastery of time, perception, and psychological resilience could determine outcomes as decisively as combat itself. By the time the standoff began to shift toward resolution, both Saladin and Richard had tested not only the enemy's strength, but their own. They had proven that leadership encompasses endurance, foresight, and the cultivation of morale and discipline over weeks as much as it does in moments of battle. The long standoff was more than inactivity. It was the deliberate shaping of circumstance, strategy, and spirit, laying the groundwork for negotiations, decisions, and eventual resolution that would define the course of history. The desert sun glinted off the white tents of the negotiating camps, casting long shadows over the sandy expanse where armies had stood for weeks. After months of maneuvering, correspondence, and cautious engagement, the moment had come to convert tension into resolution. The Treaty of Ramla was not the result of a sudden revelation or a single decisive battle. It was the product of patience, negotiation, and the measured interplay of strategy, ethics, and foresight. Saladin approached the proceedings with the same calm deliberation that had guided him through every campaign, understanding that the terms of peace could shape the region far more profoundly than any victory on the battlefield. Representatives of the Crusaders arrived, carrying with them expectations, pride, and the weight of European politics. Across the negotiating tables, Saladin maintained a composed demeanor, listening attentively, speaking with clarity, and guiding discussions toward practical solutions. He emphasized fairness, stability, and the protection of those who had suffered under the strains of war. Mercy and strategic advantage were not mutually exclusive in his view. They were complementary forces, each strengthening the legitimacy and durability of the agreement. By balancing justice with pragmatism, he created a framework that addressed immediate needs while fostering long-term peace. The treaty itself reflected careful compromise. Christian forces retained certain cities, securing access for pilgrims, while Saladin maintained control over key territories, ensuring continuity of governance and protection for Muslim populations. Terms were explicitly designed to minimize friction, safeguard civilians, and create a foundation for coexistence. Every clause was deliberate, each stipulation a reflection of lessons learned in months of observation, negotiation, and engagement. Saladin's insistence on clarity and enforceability demonstrated not only strategic acumen, but moral foresight. Peace that is just and structured endures longer than peace imposed by coercion alone. Throughout the negotiations, Saladin's presence served as a reminder that authority is measured not solely in might, but in wisdom. His calm, disciplined approach contrasted with the urgency and anxiety of the opposing envoys, reinforcing the psychological weight of patience and integrity. Soldiers, advisors, and chroniclers noted that the ability to negotiate effectively, to temper ambition with principle, and to integrate mercy into strategy was as formidable a skill as the mastery of cavalry, archery, or siege engines. The Treaty of Ramla became a testament to leadership exercised with foresight and ethical clarity. The atmosphere within the camps was one of cautious optimism. The tension that had gripped soldiers for months gradually eased, replaced by a tentative sense of stability. Pilgrims resumed their journeys with guidance from both sides. Markets reopened under careful supervision, and communication channels facilitated coordination between previously hostile forces. Saladin's careful orchestration of the treaty ensured that it would not merely end conflict in the immediate sense, but create a sustainable framework for coexistence, trade, and diplomacy. Peace was a process, he understood, not a single event. Even as the ink dried on the agreement, Saladin reflected on the broader implications. Leadership, he realized, extends beyond the battlefield to the cultivation of trust, the shaping of ethical norms, and the construction of systems that endure beyond the lifetimes of those who negotiate them. The Treaty of Ramla exemplified this philosophy, a delicate balance of power, principle, and prudence that reshaped the regional landscape without reliance on devastation or coercion. By exercising both strength and restraint, Saladin demonstrated that the true measure of a ruler is not only in victories, but in the enduring structures of justice and order they leave behind. As the camps gradually emptied and the armies withdrew, the desert itself seemed to absorb the quiet authority of the treaty. Letters and messages carried news across the region, signaling that diplomacy could complement valor, that compromise could coexist with honor, and that history often turns not on the fiercest clash of arms, but on the careful decisions made at the tables where leaders meet, deliberate, and act with foresight. The Treaty of Ramla was, in essence, a victory of strategy, patience, and humanity, a testament to the enduring power of ethical leadership. Years of relentless campaigning, travel, and governance had begun to take their toll on Saladin. His body, once tireless and precise, now bore the marks of exhaustion and the slow encroachment of illness. Yet even as strength waned, his resolve remained undiminished. Advisors and family members noticed the subtle signs: slower movements, brief pauses to catch breath, an occasional weariness that contrasted sharply with his previously unflagging energy. Still, he carried out his duties with meticulous attention, refusing to allow personal frailty to compromise the well-being of his lands or the safety of his people. The Sultan's days became a balance of rest, oversight, and reflection. He maintained councils of state, attended to petitions, and ensured that military readiness was preserved, even when his presence could no longer be physically commanding. Every decision was weighed with careful deliberation, every letter considered with attention to both content and implication. Saladin's capacity for thought, for strategy, and for moral judgment remained as keen as ever, proving that true leadership encompasses the mind and spirit as much as the body. Illness imposed a new rhythm upon the court. Courtiers, generals, and scholars adapted to his slower pace, learning to anticipate needs and provide counsel with heightened sensitivity. Yet Saladin's personal discipline remained unbroken. He observed rituals of prayer, recitation, and reflection, drawing spiritual strength as well as practical guidance. Even in weakness, he modeled endurance, humility, and composure, showing that leadership is as much about example as it is about command. His physical limitations highlighted the resilience of character, the capacity to adapt, and the continued commitment to justice and governance. Despite declining health, Saladin continued to embody generosity and ethical stewardship. He allocated resources to the needy, ensured the protection of pilgrims, and attended to communities affected by prior conflicts. Letters arrived daily from distant provinces, reporting conditions, requesting aid, or providing updates on political developments. He read each carefully, responding with guidance and decisions that reflected both experience and compassion. The Sultan's illness did not diminish his moral authority. If anything, it amplified it, illustrating that true leadership persists even when the body falters. Personal moments of contemplation became more frequent. Saladin reflected on the arc of his life. Victories won and lost, cities governed, alliances forged, and decisions made with both prudence and principle. These reflections were neither boastful nor sorrowful, but measured, acknowledging the burdens of responsibility and the limitations of mortal life. He considered the legacy he would leave, not in terms of conquest, but in the structures, ethics, and example he had established. Even as illness constrained his activities, his mind charted plans and offered guidance, ensuring continuity and stability. The burden of illness also fostered intimacy and trust within his inner circle. Generals, advisors, and family members became extensions of his will, executing decisions with fidelity and discretion. Saladin's communication, precise and deliberate, ensured that even physical distance or incapacity did not compromise governance. Observers noted that his humility and vulnerability enhanced his stature, making his wisdom and judgment even more resonant to those around him. Leadership, they realized, is tested not only in strength, but in the ability to inspire, delegate, and maintain purpose amid limitation. At night, in quiet reflection, Saladin prayed and recited passages of the Quran, drawing solace and clarity. The flicker of candlelight and the hushed murmur of prayer offered moments of serenity amid the ongoing demands of rulership. These hours of contemplation reinforced his guiding principles: justice, compassion, strategic foresight, and moral responsibility. Though the body faltered, the spirit remained steadfast, charting a course of enduring leadership that would define his legacy long after his passing. Saladin's final years were marked not by grandeur or accumulation, but by humility and generosity. Though he had ruled vast territories, commanded armies, and reshaped the political landscape, he left little for himself. Palaces and treasures were secondary to his purpose. His focus remained on justice, charity, and the welfare of his people. Advisors noted that even in illness, he maintained strict personal modesty, choosing simple meals, plain clothing, and a life guided by principle rather than opulence. Power, in his view, was a trust to be exercised responsibly, not a possession to be hoarded. Daily life reflected this ethos. Saladin continued to receive petitions, review state affairs, and oversee the allocation of resources. Yet he did so without indulgence. Generosity toward the needy and diligence in governance were intertwined. He distributed wealth to those in hardship, funded the repair of infrastructure, and supported religious and educational institutions. The Sultan's personal simplicity contrasted sharply with the lavish expectations often associated with rulers of his stature. Even in declining health, he demonstrated that leadership is measured by the ethical use of resources rather than personal accumulation. Visitors to his chambers noted the quiet dignity of his presence. The furniture was sparse, the quarters modest, and the atmosphere calm. Yet within this simplicity lay authority and wisdom. Saladin's words carried weight because they were grounded in experience, fairness, and moral clarity. Soldiers, advisors, and citizens alike revered him not for titles or displays of wealth, but for the integrity and consistency that had defined his life. His humility became a living lesson. True power is expressed in restraint, ethical action, and devotion to a higher purpose. Charity extended beyond the material. Saladin sought to mediate disputes, protect the vulnerable, and uphold fairness even in matters of governance that others might have exploited for gain. His correspondence continued, addressing conflicts, offering guidance, and reinforcing ethical conduct. Every act of generosity, every decision rooted in justice, reflected a deep understanding that a ruler's influence endures not through accumulation, but through the impact of principled leadership on people's lives. This ethos shaped both the immediate outcomes of governance and the legacy he would leave behind. In quiet moments, Saladin reflected on the impermanence of wealth and power. He considered the fleeting nature of life, the responsibilities of leadership, and the moral imperatives that had guided his actions. Prayer, contemplation, and study remained central to his routine, sustaining both spirit and clarity of judgment. These practices underscored a fundamental truth he had embodied throughout his life: that moral authority and ethical conduct outlast physical strength, military victories, and the temporary allure of riches. Even as his illness deepened, he remained attentive to the continuity of governance. Trusted generals and advisors were empowered to execute his decisions, ensuring stability and justice after his passing. Saladin's attention to succession, delegation, and ethical stewardship reflected foresight shaped by decades of experience. Leadership, he demonstrated, is as much about preparing others to uphold values as it is about personal accomplishment. In his final days, Saladin's focus remained outward. He prayed for the well-being of his people, entrusted resources for charitable use, and offered counsel to those who would continue his work. Personal desires were secondary to duty. Comfort was subordinated to principle. His passing was gentle and reflective, marked by prayers, recitation, and a calm acceptance of mortality. The Sultan, who had commanded armies and reshaped nations, left behind no vast treasures for himself. Only the enduring influence of a life guided by integrity, generosity, and humility. Saladin's legacy became a living testament to the power of restraint and ethical leadership. His simplicity and charity, even in death, contrasted with the often harsh and acquisitive world of rulers. The memory of his life, preserved in stories, chronicles, and the reverence of those who experienced his guidance, illustrated that the truest wealth lies not in possessions, but in the moral, social, and spiritual influence one leaves behind. A sultan who owned little had, in reality, left everything that truly mattered. Saladin's passing marked the end of an era, yet his influence resonated long after his final prayers and the closing of his eyes. Across the Muslim world, his name became synonymous with justice, courage, and wisdom. Chroniclers wrote of his victories tempered by mercy, of cities secured without devastation, and of principles upheld even in the face of immense pressure. For generations, rulers and citizens alike reflected on the model of leadership he embodied, a blend of strategic brilliance, moral clarity, and unwavering dedication to the well-being of his people. In Cairo, Damascus, and beyond, scholars recorded his deeds, emphasizing lessons in governance, diplomacy, and ethical conduct. Madrasas and religious institutions echoed with stories of his generosity and fairness, ensuring that the young and the learned alike understood that power could be exercised responsibly, with justice and restraint. Saladin's attention to the welfare of civilians, his protection of holy sites, and his ability to maintain unity among diverse factions became guiding principles for leaders who followed. His life was studied not merely as history, but as a blueprint for ethical leadership in turbulent times. Among the Crusader states and in European courts, Saladin's reputation grew in parallel. Knights, chroniclers, and rulers recounted his strategic genius, his courage in battle, and, most remarkably, his mercy. Tales of Jerusalem's surrender without bloodshed, the fair treatment of prisoners, and the disciplined conduct of his armies spread across kingdoms. Letters, travel accounts, and oral narratives conveyed both admiration and envy, shaping a perception of the Sultan that transcended cultural and religious boundaries. Even those who had faced him in conflict recognized the rarity of his combination of valor and ethical governance. The duality of his legacy, admiration within and beyond the Islamic world, became a testament to the universal resonance of integrity. His actions demonstrated that the measure of a leader lies not solely in conquest, but in restraint, foresight, and the capacity to inspire loyalty through justice rather than fear. Saladin's influence extended beyond the political and military sphere, reaching into the moral and philosophical considerations of leadership. Scholars debated his methods, chroniclers recorded his deeds, and ordinary citizens carried stories of his fairness and generosity, passing them from generation to generation. Trade routes, diplomacy, and pilgrimages continued under frameworks he had helped shape. The stability and cohesion he maintained, even in the final years of his life, allowed successors to govern with reference to precedent, strategy, and moral principle. Cities he had protected flourished, and communities that had witnessed his generosity recounted his deeds in enduring narratives. Saladin's legacy was both practical and symbolic, a model of ethical governance, a reminder that leadership involves both action and conscience, and an example of courage tempered by compassion. Over time, Saladin became more than a historical figure. He became an emblem of moral authority in a world often marked by conflict and ambition. Across cultures, his life illustrated the possibility of combining strength with wisdom, military skill with ethical conduct, and ambition with humility. Stories of his character, decisions, and mercy were retold in diverse contexts, shaping ideals of honor, justice, and leadership across continents and generations. To those who followed, he was not only a conqueror, but a teacher, an exemplar whose influence would endure long after his reign. Even as decades passed, the memory of Saladin shaped interactions, diplomacy, and moral reflection. In both East and West, leaders invoked his example as a guide and a cautionary tale. Communities remembered his care for civilians, his ethical approach to war, and the disciplined unity he fostered among his followers. His life became a bridge across cultural divides, demonstrating that the virtues of wisdom, justice, and mercy resonate universally, transcending the boundaries of religion, geography, and time. In this way, the world after Saladin bore the imprint of a sultan whose legacy was measured not only in victories, but in enduring respect, ethical leadership, and the quiet power of integrity. Long after the armies had dispersed, and the banners no longer flapped in desert winds, the memory of Saladin's life lingered like footprints pressed into sand. The marks he left were not just those of battles won or cities governed, but of principles lived and choices made with foresight, compassion, and moral clarity. Each step, whether across sun-baked plains, bustling cities, or sacred sites, became symbolic, an imprint of leadership that balanced strength with wisdom, courage with restraint, and ambition with humility. In quiet reflection, chroniclers noted how his presence seemed to guide the people he governed even after his passing. Merchants, pilgrims, and scholars traveled the paths he had trodden, recounting stories of his mercy, fairness, and generosity. Footprints in the sand became a metaphor for the legacy of action, guided by principle. Visible, yet fading. Delicate, yet enduring. Just as the desert shifts with each wind, the memory of a leader can be reshaped by the perspectives of those who carry it. Yet the essence, integrity, justice, and wisdom remains indelible. For those who studied him, Saladin's life offered lessons far beyond the realm of kings and generals. His decisions reflected an understanding of the human heart, the fragility of alliances, and the enduring value of patience. The same caution that guided armies across valleys and rivers also shaped his interactions with neighbors, allies, and even rivals. His legacy, therefore, was not only military or political, it was ethical, spiritual, and philosophical. Footsteps in the sand traced a path that others could follow, blending strategy with conscience and action with reflection. Pilgrims to Jerusalem and Damascus often paused, contemplating the layers of history beneath their feet. Stones and sand bore witness to generations of rulers, traders, and travelers, yet it was the stories of Saladin that seemed to linger most vividly. They recounted how he protected sacred sites, how he treated the surrendered with dignity, and how he administered justice without favor or greed. Each retelling was a step along the path he had shaped, a meditation on leadership that transcended time, culture, and conflict. The metaphor extended to the personal journey as well. Followers, scholars, and even those from distant lands could consider their own paths in life and leadership. Saladin's example illustrated that every decision leaves a mark, sometimes small, sometimes monumental, but always meaningful. Like footprints in shifting sands, actions are impermanent yet influential, shaping perceptions, behaviors, and legacies. In reflecting upon these traces, one finds guidance, humility, and a reminder that moral clarity can endure long after physical presence has passed. The desert wind carries both erasure and remembrance. Footprints may fade, but their memory can inspire future travelers. In the same way, Saladin's choices continued to inform rulers, scholars, and ordinary people. They reminded all who reflected on them that courage and wisdom, mercy and justice are qualities that endure beyond the immediacy of conquest or power. Leadership, then, is a series of deliberate steps, each leaving an impression on the world, each influencing those who follow. As the sun set over the sands he once traversed, there was a sense of continuity, a quiet rhythm connecting past to present. Saladin's footsteps were both literal and symbolic, tangible in the history he shaped, intangible in the moral and ethical lessons he imparted. To walk in his shadow, even metaphorically, was to acknowledge that history is not simply recorded in events, but felt in the enduring influence of integrity, discipline, and compassion. Footsteps in the sand, like the legacy of a remarkable life, invite reflection, learning, and the conscious choice to tread wisely upon the paths of one's own journey. The sun sank low over the desert, casting golden light across the rolling dunes, and the cities Saladin had guided with wisdom and care. In the quiet of the evening, a profound calm settled over the lands he had touched. Armies had disbanded, councils adjourned, and the clamor of conquest had faded into memory. The Sultan, who had spent a lifetime in motion, traversing hills, guiding armies, and shaping nations, now found the tranquility he had long pursued, a final rest in the house of peace. His spirit, tempered by decades of leadership, mercy, and contemplation, seemed to hover in harmony with the quiet world around him. The streets of Damascus and Cairo, once bustling with preparation and governance, now reflected stillness. Markets hummed softly with routine. Prayers echoed gently from minarets, and the scent of incense and spice mingled with the cool desert air. Even the earth itself seemed to acknowledge the passing of a life lived in pursuit of justice, wisdom, and ethical stewardship. In these moments of reflection, Saladin's essence could be imagined moving through the lands he loved. He walked once more through sunlit avenues, past scholars engaged in study, children at play, and elders recounting tales of the past. Every act of generosity, every moment of mercy, every decision made with principle lingered like a subtle rhythm in the air, a quiet echo of a life devoted not to self, but to the well-being of others. The footprints he had left in history, though invisible now, continued to guide those who sought fairness, courage, and wisdom. Rest in the house of peace was not mere inactivity. It was a continuation of purpose, transposed from the realm of action to that of contemplation. Saladin's spirit, serene and reflective, embodied the lessons he had imparted, that leadership is exercised with humility, that courage is inseparable from justice, and that true strength is measured not by conquest, but by the ethical guidance and moral clarity one leaves behind. In this final state, the world seemed to mirror his inner tranquility, a quietude that invited meditation and understanding. The night deepened, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds upon black velvet, and the world took on a sacred hush. Candles flickered in homes and mosques, their gentle light echoing the quiet illumination of wisdom and reflection. Saladin's life, illuminated in memory and chronicles, glowed softly in this serene landscape, a testament to enduring values that transcend time, conflict, and human limitation. Here, the Sultan rested not in isolation, but amidst the legacy of a life carefully and ethically lived. Travelers and pilgrims, aware of his deeds, paused in quiet acknowledgement. They reflected upon the paths of history, the lessons of moral courage, and the subtle balance between strength and compassion. In the stillness, Saladin's life became a meditation, a guide for those who would lead, serve, and act with integrity. The House of Peace, then, was not merely a destination, but a state of being, a harmony between effort and reflection, action and principle, the ephemeral and the eternal. And as the final light of day faded, the narrative of Saladin's life settled into enduring calm. He had led armies and governed nations, yet his greatest triumph lay in the principles he embodied and the legacy he left behind. Resting in the House of Peace, his spirit became a quiet guide, inviting reflection, inspiring ethical action, and demonstrating that a life devoted to justice, mercy, and wisdom is a life that continues to illuminate the world long after it has ended. The Sultan, who had owned little yet given everything, now rested in the timeless House of Peace, where his journey and the lessons of it endure forever.